Travis Kelce, Jake Ferguson are on byes. We just lost Tucker Kraft to an ACL injury, but we did get Brock Bowers back, and he went off. How's your tight end situation looking? This year has been the best year that we've had in a while at the position, so hopefully you've been thriving. But if you need to take care of a bye week, or if you had Tucker Kraft, let's go ahead and discuss some options that you might be able to utilize here in week 10 for your tight end spot. And speaking of Brock Bowers, we are going to get him first thing on Thursday Night Football going up against the Denver Broncos. Now, it's not the best matchup in the world. Denver's allowing the 8th fewest fantasy points per game, but when you get 13 targets and you catch 12 of them for over 120 yards and 3 touchdowns, the week prior, it doesn't matter who you're facing. You put Brock Bowers in your lineup. With Jakobi Meyers being traded to Jacksonville, it does open up the opportunity for him to see consistent high volume, just like he did last week, just like he did last year. Believe it or not, Las Vegas is allowing the 5th fewest fantasy points to opposing tight ends. And when it comes to Evan Ingram this week, and really all weeks moving forward, I'm kind of done with him at this point. Unfortunately, he just is not being utilized the way we were told he would be utilized by Sean Payton and his staff earlier in the offseason when they added Evan Ingram to the mix. Moving forward, it looks like this is going to be a guy that might have a decent game here or there, but he's not showing enough consistency. If you've got somebody else that you can pick up over him, I'm all for it. 3 targets last week and didn't catch any of them. Atlanta and Indianapolis over in Berlin this week, and this is going to be a solid matchup at the tight end position. Kyle Pitts gets an Indianapolis defense that's allowing the 4th most fantasy points per game. And Kyle Pitts has not shown us a lot of upside. The fantasy points haven't really been there. However, he has 26 targets over his last 3 games since the bye. He's seeing a solid amount of volume. He's got a really good matchup this week. I don't expect him to be a top 5 tight end, but he's definitely worth starting. The Atlanta Falcons allow the fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. It's not a great matchup for Tyler Warren, but he's been one of the most consistent tight ends all season long, and he's the type of guy that no matter the matchup, you will ride with him. Unless you've got like a Brock Bowers or somebody else who has higher upside than Tyler Warren every single week, you will stick with Warren. Theo Johnson, Colston Loveland. Can we trust either of these guys in this matchup with the Giants and the Bears? For Theo Johnson, he saw 6 targets last week. Daniel Bellinger has been hurt, so do we see 6 targets every single week moving forward? When you take a look at the numbers for Theo Johnson, his TD catch was basically all of his fantasy points last week, and he hasn't had a ton of consistency all season long. He'll find the end zone from time to time. He'll have a solid game from time to time. He'll go 1 week where he has decent volume, and then it disappears for 2 weeks after. That's the tough part with Theo Johnson right now. Is he a red zone threat? Yes, he is, but I'm shocked that he's not getting more targets. And as soon as Daniel Bellinger is back on the field, do those targets start going back to Bellinger some as well? I feel like everybody wants to go crazy over Colston Loveland this week, and I don't blame you. I'm a Michigan fan. I saw Loveland firsthand. I think he's a terrific athlete, and I think he's going to be a very good NFL tight end. But I'm not necessarily ready to jump on board for him being a top 12, 10, 5 tight end every single week moving forward. We need to pump our brakes a little bit. You have to keep in mind that Cincinnati defense they faced last week is inept. They are not good. And even though the New York Giants defense isn't really all that good, they are better than what Cincinnati is. Heck, that final play of the game for Chicago where they had that 58-yard touchdown pass to Colston Loveland, those 58 yards on that one play were more than any one game that Colston Loveland had all season long. His previous season high in receiving yards in a game was only 38 going into last week. He had 58 yards on 1 reception. That says a lot about how Colston Loveland has been used so far this season. Also keep in mind that Rome Odunze last week had 3 targets, only 3 targets, and he caught 0 of them. If they make a concentrated effort to get Rome Odunze going again, He definitely could see some of the targets that Loveland had last week. And Luther Burden's on the way back from concussion as well. When he returns, does that hurt Loveland? If you want to risk it with him and roll with him this week, I get it. And I wouldn't be shocked if he at least has a decent game. But if you have better tight ends that you've been playing so far this season, I would probably start to go with those a little bit more. After seeing only 3 targets 2 weeks ago, Dalton Kincaid bounced back as the tight end 3 last week. Earlier in the season, going up against Miami, he went for 66 yards and a touchdown, and Miami is still allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Greg Dulcich saw 5 targets and caught all 5 of them for 49 yards last week, and it's the first time a tight end has done anything this season for Miami that's not named Darren Waller. And Waller will be coming back probably here in a couple of weeks, so Dulcich doesn't have much fantasy value moving forward. But if you were thinking about starting him this week after he had a decent showing last week, I probably wait, seeing as how Buffalo allows the 2nd fewest fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Baltimore and Minnesota, and Mark Andrews is coming off of a 2-touchdown performance that I'm sure excited owners that were willing to hold on to him. And if you played him, even better. Now, those performances seem to come and go a lot more often than what we were used to seeing in the last few years, but Mark Andrews still has fantasy value. Last week, Minnesota got torched by Sam Laporta, especially at the beginning of the game. So with Lamar Jackson back and hopefully we get some consistency from Andrews. I know TJ Hockenson had a touchdown last week, and I know that he basically had one called back the week prior. So maybe we're starting to see him be utilized a little bit more, but it's not enough yet at this point. Because yes, he had the touchdown last week, but he only had 11 receiving yards and 3 targets. It's not enough for me to jump back on board yet. Coming out of the bye, we haven't heard a ton about David Njoku or Harold Fannin, but both of them were banged up prior to the bye week, and I'm wondering how healthy they are this week. It's a solid matchup this week, going up against the New York Jets. Both of them scored a touchdown right before the bye, and it looks like they both can be utilized at the same time as long as Dylan Gabriel continues to look at David Njoku in the red zone. It feels like Harold Fannin will have a little bit of a better floor, and they both will have about the same upside. Mason Taylor has been up and down all season long, and more times than not, if you try to start him, you're just not feeling great about it. And there's going to be risk once again. But last week, 8 targets, 5 receptions, 34 yards, and a touchdown. He was the tight end 7 last game. If we can get those type of numbers consistently, then we have got a guy that can be a top 12 tight end. It will be interesting to see how Adonai Mitchell fills into this team and if he starts to take targets away from Mason Taylor right away. New England and Tampa Bay have probably 2 of the more intriguing options at tight end that you want to start every single week that more times than not end up letting you down. Hunter Henry last week had 6 targets, 4 receptions, 51 yards, which is a solid line. It's not nearly the upside that we would like. I hope that he gets looked at in the red zone more often moving forward. But we have to see what happens with Kayshon Boutte. He's experiencing issues with his hamstring right now. If he misses a game or if he's not 100% over the next couple of weeks, my hope is that Hunter Henry would get those looks that Kayshon Boutte has been getting recently in the red zone. It's a solid matchup for Cade Otton this week going up against New England, as they currently allow the 10th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. But since Tampa Bay is coming out of the bye, we have not heard a whole lot about Chris Godwin and when he's going to return. And if it is this week, it definitely hurts Cade Otton. But if Godwin doesn't play this week, then Cade Otton is in a position to give you at least a solid floor that you've seen over the last few weeks. I'm just not feeling the fact that he'll have a ton of upside regardless of the matchup. With the trade of Rashid Shaheed to the Seattle Seahawks, I hope that opens up the floor for Juwan Johnson to be much safer throughout the rest of the season. Only 4 targets last week. I'm glad that he ended up grabbing a touchdown to help out fantasy owners, because that type of volume, we're not going to last a whole lot with him in our lineup. Juwan Johnson doesn't fit the same role as Rashid Shaheed did, but it is one less player on the field that you need to worry about targets going to. We'll talk about Rashid Shaheed and that fallout a little bit more in the wide receiver video, but my hope is it does help Juwan Johnson. I just hope New Orleans can clean up their offense a little bit and get Juwan Johnson more involved on a more consistent basis. But speaking of getting things cleaned up, let's talk about our sponsors for today's video, Caddy Splash. As unpredictable as this NFL season has been, I can tell you one thing even more unpredictable. and that's my golf game. I never know how I'm going to shoot when I show up to the course, but I do know with my friends over at Caddy Splash, at least I'll look good, both myself and my clubs. The last thing you want to do is show up and play like absolute crap and your clubs to look the same way. And you can get 15% off of your order over at Caddy Splash by using code HEADLINERS at checkout. You can use the link down in the description below, head on over to their website, take a look at all of their great products, stuff that I personally carry in my bag to help keep my golf clubs clean, so at least I look good every time I go on the golf course, even if I do find myself in the water more times than not. With the amount of options that we have at the tight end position this year, trying to figure out when it's okay to play the Carolina tight ends is just not something I'm willing to do on a weekly basis. There are much better options out there. It's been weeks since either of them were fantasy viable. I would go ahead and just forget about these guys for right now. Houston is currently allowing the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. And based on what I've seen Jacksonville doing with their tight end since Brenton Strange went down, I have absolutely no interest in what they could do during this matchup. Dalton Schultz gets a great matchup though, because Jacksonville currently allows the 2nd most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Schultz was the 2nd target behind Nico Collins last week. 8 targets, 6 receptions for 77 yards. And with Davis Mills potentially being at quarterback this week, it would be interesting to see if Dalton Schultz sees a few more targets than what we've been used to. He's had some really great matchups this year that he hasn't done anything in. There's been times where all the wide receivers seem to be hurt and Dalton Schultz still can't get anything done. And then from time to time, out of nowhere, he has that game that you really need. Trey McBride had a great matchup against Dallas last week, and this matchup going up against Seattle is not going to be super easy, but he is the one guy on this team that you can trust to see target after target after target. Both of the Seattle tight ends were going to be a sit for me this week. I understand both of them had a touchdown last week, Barner's being a rushing touchdown, but this is a solid matchup going up against Arizona, currently allowing the 6th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Now, why were they going to end up being sits? Well, here's the thing. Neither of them are really seeing an exorbitant amount of volume at this point. AJ Barner, he has played more snaps than Elijah Arroyo every single week this season. And I know Arroyo had the receiving touchdown last week, but he only had 2 targets. And when you take a look at it, Arroyo, this was the first time all season he finished inside the top 25 tight ends. That's not great consistency for anybody. AJ Barner has 4 finishes inside the top 12. He has 1 other finish inside the top 24, but then he has been outside the top 37 3 times. That's a lot of inconsistency. Tyler Higbee's matchup with San Francisco, who's currently allowing the 9th fewest fantasy points per game to tight ends, is not one I'm super interested in. Yeah, he's got 2 touchdowns over the course of the last 3 weeks, but in the 2 weeks prior to last week, he only had 19 and 13 receiving yards. There's no consistency here right now. George Kittle is having a slow return from his hamstring injury, and maybe that's because he still isn't quite 100% as of yet, but hopefully we can get him going very soon, and once we do, it's going to be hard to stop that train. Washington is allowing the 7th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, and Sam Laporta is coming off a very solid performance against Minnesota. That first drive last week, I mean, he was the dude, right? Over and over, target after target, big touchdown. He's been the tight end 4 in 3 of the last 4 weeks, but it's those finishes outside the top 12 that are very concerning, and one of the reasons why he's a fringe start and not a must start. I mean, what other options is Marcus Mariota going to have going up against Detroit? Deebo Samuel? Yeah. Terry McLaurin? He's not going to be back for a while. Luke McCaffrey? He's done for the season. Zach Ertz? Him and Mariota are not on the same page, and he has not looked towards Zach Ertz very much in any of his starts this season, but there's not a whole lot of other options. If you can look at me with a straight face and tell me that you know exactly how to predict what Pittsburgh tight end is going to do something on any given week, then you can come have my job, because I've looked over it over and over, and there is no rhyme or reason to any of this. Jonnu Smith, he has the most snaps every single week, but he hasn't done anything in forever. Pat Freiermuth and Darnell Washington, they keep switching back and forth. One will have more snaps, then the other one will have more snaps. And I mentioned maybe why last week. Maybe it had to do with the run game and the game plan for blocking. This is not a great matchup. Chargers allow the 6th fewest fantasy points per game, but if you need a crapshoot this week and you're looking to like go for a touchdown, then I would say Pat Freiermuth has the best shot. Rondé Gadsden has been on fire as of late, and now he gets a great matchup against Pittsburgh, who's currently allowing the 3rd most fantasy points per game. Last week was a down performance compared to his recent standards. 5 targets, 5 receptions for 68 yards. I mean, he finished just outside the top 12 with those numbers, though. It's the touchdowns that push him just inside the top 12 and make him a top option every single week. But from what we've seen, he's easily a top 3 option on this team right now. What will we get from Dallas Goedert this week? It's a great matchup on Monday Night Football, going up against Green Bay, allowing the 8th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. But since missing week 2, and here's the kicker here, he has at least 1 touchdown in all but 1 game and 7 touchdowns in 6 games. But he has had 4 or fewer targets in 4 of those 6 games. So we are really dependent on a touchdown right now, and if he doesn't get it, it's not great. Even if Tucker Kraft would have been healthy this week, it still would have been a tough matchup. Philadelphia allows the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. So it's more of a wait and see thing with Luke Musgrave now, who will take over with Tucker Kraft being done for the season with an ACL injury. I think it is very important to note moving forward that Luke Musgrave was a higher draft pick than Tucker Kraft, and he had a better profile coming out of college than what Tucker Kraft did. Now, Kraft has done way better in the NFL, has made the most out of his opportunities, and has played far better than Musgrave, so he absolutely deserves it. I just want to remind everyone that Musgrave was a big prospect coming out, and if he's learned anything over the last year and a half, maybe he can offer something down the stretch. Headliner Nation, I'm trying to record this video and keep up with all of the breaking news happening with trades here at the trade deadline. I'm not exactly sure when this video would end up coming out, because if there's any major trades, we might have to slip a breaking news video in there, and this may have to come out a little bit later. But Headliner Nation, hit that like button, subscribe, bell notifications, all of it. I gotta go process some breaking news and see what happened with everything. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.